Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this online WES Talk organised by John Wesley's New Room, Bristol, in partnership with the Methodist Church's Learning Network South West. John Wesley's New Room is the oldest Methodist building in the world. Situated in Bristol city centre, John Wesley called the chapel a light in the city and used it as a base for his work. In 2017, a new visitor centre opened on the site, which featured a new revamped cafe, museum, shop, library and meeting rooms, as well as the historic chapel. My name's Mandy Briggs and I'm the education officer here. And behind the scenes is my colleague Louise Rappel tonight. Just a few notes before we start. Please note that this talk is being recorded. So during the talk, you will be able to see and hear our speakers as they talk, but your own video and audio will be switched off. If you have particular questions that you would like to ask the panel, please save them for the question time towards the end of the hour, when we will ask you to write your questions in the Q&A facility. You can access this by clicking Q&A at the bottom of the screen, not the chat box. Definitely the Q&A box. This WES talk is entitled Welcoming the Stranger. And the question that we're exploring this evening is, how can we positively welcome refugees and asylum seekers into our local communities? And we've got two speakers this evening, hopefully three. We've got a bonus person as well. There has been much debate in the media recently about refugees and asylum seekers, mostly linked to small boats crossing the English Channel. It is a reality that provokes strong reactions from commentators, the general public and politicians, but obviously sometimes these reactions are negative. Tonight we want to explore this topic in a different way. We want to look at what is being done positively to welcome refugees and asylum seekers into local communities. We're going to be hearing from representatives from two very different projects. We're going to speak about their experiences in supporting and learning from families and individuals. So I'd really like to welcome this evening Dr. Jenna from Westbury Welcome Refugee Community Sponsorship and Susanna Rivolti from Borderlands. Both of these projects are based in Bristol, and through talking about the work that both do, we hope to offer an insight into what is possible in local communities, but also the challenges still being faced when it comes to supporting people. We hope that Susanna will be joined later by Leonette, a member of Borderlands, who will be speaking about her own experience. Dot and Susanna, thank you so much for both joining us this evening. I believe that Susanna is going to speak first, hopefully to be joined by Leonette, and then Dot will speak. So Susanna, thank you for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Mandy, and hi to Dot. Nice to see you. Thank you, Mandy, for inviting Borderlands to this talk. Welcoming the stranger really resonates with what we do at Borderlands. So yeah, we were really pleased to be invited to this talk. So hi, everyone. I am Susanna. I am the director at Borderlands. Borderlands is a small to medium-sized charity. We are based in Bristol, in Easton. The work of Borderlands stems from the work of the parish of St. Nicholas of Tolentino. They started working with the community of asylum seekers and refugees back at the beginning of 2000. And throughout the years, the work of the parish expanded, and Borderlands became finally a charity in 2013. We are now 7 members of staff, and we support asylum seekers, refugees, and those with unstable or unsecure immigration status. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the concept of refugees and asylum seekers or other migrants, and it is a very, very complicated and complex kind of world for us to navigate. So you can imagine how difficult it is for people who don't have language and arrive in this country fled their own country. They, fled persecution. They are traumatized. So it's really, really difficult to understand all the terminology around. And this is not the aim of the talk, but just for everyone to understand, like a clear separation of the terminology. So asylum seeker is a person who is still seeking asylum and they have not yet received a response from the Home Office about their asylum claim. And refugee is a person who applied for asylum and they heard back from the Home Office, and the Home Office says, yes, we believe that you can't go back to your country. You are fleeing persecution and there are good reasons for that. And therefore we are granting you some protection. And once a person becomes refugee, it's a 5-year leave to remain in this country. So at Borderlands, we work with people who are still have this decision pending on them, and they are waiting, and they are placed in some kind of a limbo in the system. We also work with refugees, so people who have been granted refugee status, have got their 5-year leave to remain, and they are looking for a job and really integrating the community. Plus, we work as well with the destitute asylum seekers, so people who have fallen into the gaps of the system and they're not receiving support from the government. They are sometimes called undocumented migrants. Sometimes people refer them as illegal. We don't believe that there is no such a thing as an illegal person. It's something that, of course, the media and politicians use to kind of discriminate and categorize people. So we work with quite a variety, like a range of people with very different needs. What is Borderlands? Borderlands is a place of welcome, and that's why it relates really well to the title of today's session. What is our mission? Our mission is to create a welcome of community in Bristol, to alleviate poverty and hardship, especially for destitute asylum seekers, and support their integration in the community. And our logo recite that Borderlands is a place that goes from exclusion to a place to belonging. So this is our overarching goal. Back in 2020, before the lockdown started, the first lockdown started, we went through a great consultation with our members. When I say members, I refer to asylum seekers and refugees and those who come, our service users, so-called. So we started this long consultation with our members, and we asked them, what are the values of Borderlands? How would you define it? How would you name it? The kind of the elements and the feeling that you feel when you first arrive at Borderlands. And they have come up with the words sharing, warmth, dignity and respect for everyone. So these are the 4 overarching values that we promote and we try and reflect in all the practical work that we do at Borderlands. At Borderlands, we have a welcoming space, a drop-in space. Before the pandemic, it was open on a Monday and a Tuesday. And now, of course, due to COVID, the restrictions, we had to readapt, but this hasn't meant that we stopped working. We have always, and we are really proud of this, we have never shut our drop-in space throughout the whole pandemic, throughout the whole different lockdowns. So we have always navigated the restrictions. So we still offer on a Tuesday a welcoming space. We offer hot food, which is culturally appropriate, and it is cooked by members who are chefs or who have been who are trained to become chefs. At the moment, in our kitchen, we have quite a strong Bengali community of chefs. So people come on a Tuesday, they come through our door, they get registered, they get welcomed by a number of volunteers who are members themselves, which is really nice. It's a really nice, important element that is not just us white people welcoming them, it is members that themselves who are more experienced and who have gone through the process and know Borderlands and feel that they can represent and own this space as much as we do. Once they are welcomed and registered, then we do a risk, a needs assessment if they are firstly arrived. With offer them the welcome space, a space for socialize. We offer them the food. We have as well a takeaway option at the moment that was introduced because of COVID. We offer English classes, and because of COVID, we had again to readapt. So we went from a Zoom phase of English classes, and now we are back to face-to-face, but only for pre-entry level, because we realized throughout the pandemic that the people who were most marginalized and were left out were those who, besides the digital poverty, but were the people who really had a really low level of English. So we are targeting our English classes to pre-entry level students. We run a mentoring project that supports, that provides one-to-one support between refugees, asylum seeker, and a local mentor. And they provide, the local mentor provide both practical and emotional support. They support asylum seekers and refugees navigating the system, really standing alongside them while they go through this very, very complicated and frustrating and draining asylum process. The mentors are really a key and a vital, reliable point of contact for our vulnerable members. They provide support for up to 6 to 9 months. We saw throughout the pandemic that this was not enough, so we have extended that, and people have given more than I suppose 12 to 15 months of support. They meet at a weekly basis. They can meet at borderlands or outside. And yeah, it is a great project and has been really, really successful so far. We wouldn't exist without the help of over 100 volunteers who support us remotely, of course, during the pandemic, but mostly they support us on a face-to-face. And we are quite proud of Borderlands because most of our services are member-led. So as I mentioned earlier, in our kitchen, we have a team of member chefs. In our English classes, some of our teaching assistants are people who reached a level of English that allow to support the people who are with a lower level of English, to support them in during the lesson, and if needed to translate for them. We have peer mentors, so the people who welcome and register newly arrived asylum seekers in Bristol that come to Borderlands are people who went through the mentoring training, and then the mentoring managers have readapted that training, and they provide kind of a more focused training in how to support peers and how they can look after themselves while supporting people that are going through a similar situation to what they went through. And then we have volunteer drivers. We have that delivered food during the lockdowns to people who are self-isolating, and this unfortunately it hasn't stopped, it's still going on. We have an advisory board, so we have members who have their own consultation group, and they support us in making decisions that are as much as possible members-led, and then these decisions that will then inform our budget. So we are really, really proud, and we keep working on finding ways so that our members can be really part of the strategic thinking of the charity and making sure that they have a good say in what they think we should do, in which direction Borderland should drive in the future. Maybe you're interested in wondering where asylum seekers and refugees come from these days, and the picture in Bristol have changed quite a lot since I started working in this sector. As you probably know, in Bristol there is a big Somalian and Sudanese community, an Eritrean and Ethiopian community. Nowadays, well, in the last 2 years, for sure, we have seen an increased number of unaccompanied asylum seekers. So minors who have arrived in the UK by themselves and not being accompanied by a guardian or a family member, and this is especially people from Afghanistan, and it's been really difficult and interesting at the same time, because we saw a shift as well in the services and the way that we were delivering that in order to really meet the needs of these people. Something else that I really want to talk about, or to at least mention to you. So of course, asylum seekers and refugees are people, as you probably read from the news or the headlines, or for your own interest, are people who are extremely traumatized. They go, they go through this so-called threefold trauma. So the trauma they experience because they leave their country, so all the persecution, the war, or because of you're belonging to a social group. And then there is the trauma that they experience when they migrate, so during their migration journey. And then there is a third trauma, which is the trauma that they experience once they arrive in the country, in the place of safety. And that's it is extremely sad to see a person nowadays needs to still experience a trauma while they are seeking sanctuary and protection in a country that have signed, agreements with other countries to really ensure that they have a system in place to give protection to these people. So this is what this is kind of what the people that we meet every day go through, and it is extremely difficult sometimes to work with them. It is extremely satisfactory. I think something that, like a message they really want you to take home, is that yes, they are victims and they are people who suffered a lot, but they are also a huge resource for this country, and they are survivors. They are extremely resilient, and they are an inspiration for all of us who have the honor to really work with them. They are people who come from their country with their talents and their ambitions and their big dreams or small dreams. And I am honored every day to walk alongside them and to make sure that they are able to fulfill their lives and to really aim to go towards an independent space. I was hoping to be joined by, again, one of our members who is starting college today, and she wanted to send a message, as she's probably not able to be with us. I just want to share with you what she is saying about her challenges. If people can't hear this, just let me know. I'm sure that the technical person will let me know if there is a problem. But yeah, her name is Lianette, and she comes from Cuba. She arrived in Bristol during the lockdown. It was an extremely challenging time for people to arrive in a new city, and then we were all shut, or with like supporting people in a very limited way. But she has been an absolute star, and she is. You will now hear she speaks good English, so we really adopted her, and she became our intern. So we train her, and it's really nice to have people like Lianette on board supporting our work. So we'll share with you what she's saying.
Hi, Susie. Just in case I cannot make it, I would like to mention two things to you, so you can pass the idea if it's useful. I think in general way, it's really hard for refugees to find out the charities like Borderlands who can help them, because the first contact with help is with migrant help, and they don't really help too much. For example, I came to Bristol because when I was in Blackpool, because I was working, I had some savings, and I reported that to migrant health. So they say that I should be able to rent myself until the money finished. But on the other hand, no one wanted to rent to me. So I was struggling a lot to find a place to stay. That's why I came to Bristol, because a friend of mine was helping me the first months. After a while, I did find a rent here, but the rent was very, very bad. That's why the landlord accepted us, because the place was rubbish, you know. So most of the asylum seekers, I already know that they are not in the same situation as me, because most of the people come without money and without help. But in general way, migrant help should be more approachable. They act like robots, you know. If you don't fit exactly all the requirements they have, they don't help you, you know. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, as I was mentioned at the beginning, it's really hard to find out which places you can go to find some help, because I found Borderlands by chance. I went to the city council after a month. I've been here in Bristol, looking for a place to volunteer, a place to help, to do something with my free time. And by chance, a gentleman there called Mohammed gave me Borderlands number and Bristol Refugee Rights and another place, I don't remember the name. And I contacted Borderlands, first of all, to volunteer. And then I found out that it was a charity for asylum seekers and refugees, you know? So, as I speak a little bit English, I could quickly integrate myself in the rhythm of the city and the places I should go, like the college, like Borderlands, etc. But for other kind of asylum seekers, it's really hard to do these things, you know. I will try to make it, but just in case I cannot, you have a couple of ideas. Thank you.
Okay, this was a short testimony of our Lynette, just to really show you how difficult and how hostile the environment is, and no matter sometimes how much we try to do outreach work, is still hard to really reach out to these people, because it's not like we're not given a list of asylum seekers that arrive in the country and they say, okay, now Borderlands, you support and you help these people and you find accommodation and a job if they are refugees. It's not like that. It is quite difficult. We wait for people to come to us. So yes, I think my time is almost over, but it is really challenging and it is a hostile environment. But at the same time, like I just want to really highlight how precious these people are, and how much how much potential there is that unfortunately, due to the hostile environment and the legal framework, is not possible for us to really use them, and pass me the term, and to really make the most of it. So places like Borderlands are really, really important. Thank you for listening. And there is John put on the chat the link to Borderlands website, so have a look. Really happy to answer any question at the end, or if you want to chat further, there is all my details and my staff details that are on the website. Thank you, Mandy, over to you.
Thank you, Susanna, and please pass our thanks on to Lynette for sharing her thoughts. We've never had a call within a Zoom call before, so yeah, congratulations to Louise, our tech person, for all of that going really well, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and an introduction to Borderlands with us. I'm going to hand over now to Dot. I know, Dot, that you want to share your screen at some point, so I will hand over to you, and let's hear something about Westbury Welcome. Thank you.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. And thanks, it was interesting to listen to Susanna, and I can certainly, you know, resonate with some of the things that she has said. Our organisation is quite different, and I'm not going to share the screen at the moment. This is just something for me. So I'm part of Westbury Welcome, which is a refugee community sponsorship group. And I'm just going to give you perhaps a bit of background as to how community sponsorship groups came about, what they are and how they operate, and then about Westbury Welcome, what we've done and what we hope to do. So the background is, I think probably was the start of the Syrian war in 2011 and the refugee crisis that followed from that. And in 2014, David Cameron committed the UK to resettling 20,000 refugees from the Syrian war by 2020. Many people thought that number was too low, and I'm sure others thought it was too high. The scheme became known as the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme. And you might wonder, well, aren't all refugees vulnerable? So what's the vulnerable persons refugee scheme? How does it differ? Well, it was designed, it seemed, to help those who had the greatest need. And they included things like people who required urgent medical attention, survivors of violence and torture, and women and children at risk. So they were the ones who were considered to be vulnerable. And I think, listening back to Susanna, the thing that's come out of our experience is sometimes people have referred to the families we're supporting as vulnerable. And I think they are vulnerable in as much as they don't know the language, culture, etc. But they are amazingly resilient. And that's what we should be focusing on. But anyway, that was what was talked about. They had to be specifically and especially vulnerable. So that once they were registered as a refugee with the UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, they're identified as even more vulnerable, and their particular needs could only be met in another country, like the UK. So from the refugee camp or whatever their dwelling was, but they were registered as refugees. So it was deemed that they had particular needs, could only be met in another country, like UK. The details of those people referred to the Home Office for them to verify that, I suppose, that they agreed with the circumstances. And at that stage, the information would have been passed on to the devolved administrations of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and to local authorities in England who would manage the arrival and support of those families. Obviously, local authorities have limited resources, had limited resources. So the support and the number of people, number of families that they were able to support was similarly limited. And I think I'm just going to remind ourselves of some of the images that were, this is where I need to share my screen. Some of the images that were in the press at this time. So I hope, has that come through? Okay. Yes, some of the images that I'll just put this here. These are some of the images that were coming through at this time. And I know we're still seeing people arrive, but this was what was happening at this time. And I think this is the one that everybody really remembered, and the one that really impacted a lot. So with that in mind, in people's minds, excuse me, just need to get back to where I was. Those images were from 2015. And I don't know what triggered the government to introduce community sponsorship. Maybe it was the public outcry from seeing those images and a recognition of how such a programme could help people, you know, people who just desperately wanted to do something more than maybe putting their hand in their pocket, which obviously, you know, is needed to fund things, but to actually really feel you're doing something, I think was what impacted. But whatever the reason, community sponsorship was introduced into the UK in 2016. And it's a programme that had been successfully running in Canada since 1979, when the Vietnam, as they were referred to, the Vietnam boat people were escaping from persecution. So the community sponsorship programme was introduced, and it would run alongside the VPRS, the Vulnerable Persons Scheme, that was being operated by local authorities. The number of refugees resettled under community sponsorship would be additional to the 20,000. So the government was keeping its commitment to 20,000, but was enabling communities to do more. There were two different programs, but basically supporting refugees identified as vulnerable. So bearing that in mind, the question might be, well, how does it actually differ? So the big and most obvious difference is that families would be supported in their resettlement to an independent life in the UK by a group of people rather than a local authority support worker. That makes a real difference. It's a group of people, not just the one person that the local authority was able to have available. The group in turn is supported by the local authority. So all the skills that they've got and the support that's needed, we can link into it, ask for help, but we do the work, I suppose. That's how you would look at it. In Bristol, we are really, really fortunate. The support from the City Council is really excellent. So that's the programme. That's the programme. But what does a community sponsorship group actually look like? Well, firstly, everybody, we're all volunteers. And that means that we're made up of people who are motivated, they're committed, they're willing, and they're able to give their time. And they clearly care. There'll be a variety of skills, talents, interests, and networking available. They'll have the varied backgrounds. Some will be retired, some in full-time paid employment, some part-time workers, some full-time working at home. They'll be local to the community where the family is living. So that's really what it will look like in terms of the people and the structure. But in order to welcome a family, the group must be approved by the Home Office. It can't just be a group of people who get together and say, hey, it's a great idea, let's get on with it. You have to actually be approved by the Home Office. And that's quite a cumbersome application that you have to make, but they are making it easier and easier. From when we did it a few years ago to how it's done now, it is much easier. You have to be set up as a charity in the first place, or have a lead sponsor that's a registered charity. Westbury Welcome has a lead sponsor, which is Citizens UK. We felt that it was going to be a lot of work setting ourselves up as a charity, and we could do this straight away by being under the umbrella of Citizens UK. I'm going to have a sip of water, excuse me. You had to complete this application form, and that had to show evidence of a number of things. I probably will miss some stuff out, but the really significant things are you had to have raised £9,000. You had to have found a home that you could ensure would be available for 24 months. Obviously, the house would have to be equipped. You had to identify schools in the area. At that stage, you don't know what children, if any children, would be part of the family. But you had to actually show the Home Office that you'd looked and there are schools available. Healthcare facilities. You needed to make sure that there were healthcare facilities that were able to take on more patients. You had to ensure that you would be able to provide ESOL training in teaching, English for speakers of foreign language, of other languages. So you didn't have to actually provide that teaching yourself. If there's a college, you just had to be aware of it. But you did have to set up teaching that would start fairly soon after their arrival. And that could mean that you'd be doing it from the volunteers, not college. You had to liaise with the local community where the house was going to be and make sure that, they were fully aware of what was going to happen. You had to have interpreters for the language of the family that were coming in. You had to have evidence of your welcoming arrangements. You had to liaise with the local authority and with the police. You had to tell them about where the property was going to be. So the local authority would let you know whether it met the requirements, and the police would make sure that it was in an area where there are not going to be any problems. You had to have internet set up, finance, banking, and more. You had to be able to show that you were able to do this. You didn't actually do all those things in advance, but you have to make sure that you've said how you're aware that it needs to be done and how you'd be able to do it. And you had to agree to support the family for 12 months. So the house for 24 months provides support for 12 months. And that's quite an interesting issue, but maybe we'll talk about that later. Once you've been approved by the Home Office, the group is linked to a family. And the way that's done is that the details of what the community sponsorship group can offer is passed to the UNHCR from the Home Office. The details of a family who fit what is on offer are passed from the UNHCR to the Home Office and back to the community sponsorship group. The community sponsorship group reviews the details and decide if it's able to support the family. If it's yes, arrangements are made for the family's arrival. If it's no, the UNHCR will offer details of another family to be reviewed. But once a link has been established, the Home Office and UNHCR organise the travel arrangements, and within about 6 weeks, maybe less, the family will arrive. Now, in that time, the members of the community sponsorship group, it really hits you that this is real. And they will start organising themselves for the arrival day and the first few weeks following the arrival. And what they have to do to prepare themselves for this is they have to sort out the airport welcome arrangements, which is transport, whether we need any extra clothes, depending on the weather. You just don't know what people will be arriving with. You have to be prepared for all sorts of eventualities. Snacks, car seats, interpreters, all those things just to get to the airports and be able to bring the family back. You have to have a welcome arrangement at the house, somebody there, food has to be in the cupboard, a meal for their arrival. Also, importantly, you have to be familiarised with the house, and instructions for various appliances have to be in the family's first language, and things have to be labelled up so that the family know what's sort of behind all the cupboard doors, I suppose. Plans have to be in place for language teaching within about a week of the family's arrival. And plans have to be in place for the family to be familiarised with the local area, how the transport system works, where the shops are, and other facilities. Once you know what the family it consists of in terms of children, we would have made contacts with the schools to see if there were places. And hopefully that would have been set up. But we then have a very good contact at Bristol City Council, whose name was mentioned by Susanna, to help us with that. They have to be registered with the job centre for benefits, doctor surgeries, and we have to be thinking about where we might be going with employment and training, but not in the first week. We have to ensure that banking arrangements are set up because benefits have to be paid into a bank. And one of the really important things, as soon as the families arrive, is they want internet access to contact people they've left behind, to let them know that they are safely where they are and to find out that their family members or friends are safe too. A little further down the road, the group will work with the family members as they transition to independence. And that's what our role is. Our role is resettling a family to enable them to live independently in the UK. We're supporting them, but we are not doing anything for them that we believe that they can do for themselves. That's the way that we will work over the 12 months and longer. So that's a general overview. And now perhaps for a little bit about Westbury Welcome's experience. Oops, lost my place, sorry. We were formed in the summer of 2017, and we were one of the early community sponsorship groups. As of November 2021, we were one of 309, and I suspect that number will have gone up quite a bit even by now. We're a group of people who live in and around the Westbury-on-Trim area of Bristol. We have no political or religious affiliation, but quite a few of us are connected with Westbury Baptist Church, but that's because one of our leaders of the first, when we were first set up, had been liaising with the City Council to support some families that had come in under the Vulnerable Persons Scheme. And she was approached to link with somebody called Alan Cook, who had the Canada connection and was very, very experienced in community sponsorship. So, but we are people of no religious affiliation, and there were people of various religious affiliations. It's a really, it has no, we're just people. Currently, we have a core team of 10. There's about 30 years separating our ages. Some people are retired, obviously. Well, not obviously, but they are. Some are in full-time work, some part-time. We've got active volunteers of around 25. Again, a mixed demographic. And we have a mailing list of just under 100, which includes the active volunteers. But 60% of that number are willing to be contacted for help, and 40% willing to support in other ways. So far, we've welcomed 2 families into the area, and we've welcomed 2 families into the area. And some of us at the moment are supporting the local authority support worker who's supporting one of the Afghan families who's been resettled into the area. And also we are supporting 2 newly established community sponsorship groups, just offering them help and advice as and when they need it. The first family arrived in November 2018. It was a cold, wet, windy day up at Bristol Airport. They were a family of six. Well, they are a family of six. They were a complex family and they have complex needs. And we're not now over 3 years since they've been here. So if you remember back to me saying you have to commit to support them for a year, I think very, very, very few community sponsorship groups would have, after a year, felt their job was done. Our family is still receiving ad hoc educational and social support, and that's being provided by some current members of Westbury Welcome and ex-members of Westbury Welcome. They were there to support the family, and they moved on and did other things, but they do it on the basis of friendship now rather than part of a formal arrangement. Even those who are still connected with Westbury Welcome, it's a friendship arrangement, not a volunteer arrangement. The mother of this family provided the welcome meal for the second family and advised us on suitable kitchen equipment. And that resonates, I think, with what Susanna was saying about how people who've benefited from Borderlands are then now helping other people to benefit. The oldest and the youngest child of that family have acted as interpreters for the second family on a couple of occasions. So our second family, they arrived in February 20, I was going to say this year, but last year, February 2021, in the middle of COVID restrictions. We had lockdown, didn't we, in March 20, and at that time, all plans for families to arrive came to a halt. And there were community sponsorship groups who were just ready to meet people at the airport in the next week or something, just stopped. There were houses that were ready. They weren't able to do anything about that. And then when we got to, I think it was the end of 2020, it was agreed that families could start to arrive again. And the family that arrived in February 2021 was one of the families who actually, I think, completed the commitment to the 20,000, and it was a little bit over. So they arrived in 2021. It's a family of 5. The children are now settled in schools and understanding and speaking a good amount of English. And they were just coming up to a year next month. So this is really impressive. The parents are attending ESOL college course, and they're understanding and speaking a good amount of English. And both of the parents have moved up a class. The older 2 children's English is probably better, though, I must admit. They are a very, very happy family. Dad is working towards passing his driving theory test and has some employment. They're making GP appointments independently. They manage their own lives. They're making friendships with the neighbours as well as people they've met through the Syrian community. The volunteers are regularly welcomed into their home for birthdays and other celebrations. The family have enjoyed community aspects of Halloween, interested in how we celebrate Christmas. The dad and I often have talks about Islam and Christianity and the similarities, and it's just great. Mum is teaching some of us how to cook Kurdish dishes, and I could go on. But it's not always been plain sailing. There have been a few bumps in the road, extra challenges, but a lot of rewarding and exciting times as well. So again, I'd just like to share my screen again, see if I can remember how to do it each time. Yeah, so as I said, there've been a few bumps in the road, and not serious ones, but I think it's important to know that these things happen. There've also been challenges, and there've been exciting things and rewarding things, and I'll talk about those a tiny bit as well. Group dynamics, sometimes those were a little bit of a problem. You know, you get any group of people working together, and in those early days when you're trying to find your own role, and as I say, we were one of the early groups, so we didn't really, I think we didn't have an example to follow. So you're sort of clambering around a little bit. You're not really sure what you're trying to achieve. Well, you know the long-term goal, but the steps towards it. The enormity of the task just occasionally just got so big, you know, and you weren't sure whether you were really making the progress you needed to make. And the disconnect between that pre-arrival work when, you know, maybe you're getting everything sorted, and then suddenly there's the real family arriving, and this has all got to match together. And when we got to the time where, after it was coming up for 2 years, where we felt that really we should be enabling the family to become as independent as they could be and start to step back, there was a little bit of a problem there, in that some people felt that we were abandoning them, and we were trying to explain, not abandoning them, we're just trying to step back a bit and help them move forward. And it was our first time doing this as well, so you know, that was a tricky time. It was a bit of a bump in the road, and it was during COVID. It was definitely a bit tricky, but there's definitely rewarding times and things that you learned, which, you know, seeing beyond your own horizons. It really was an eye opener, and learning about what's going on in your own community. You know, for example, learning about organisations like Borderlands, the Haven, and other things that are in existence that to help refugee families that come to this country. And certainly increasing cultural awareness, and it was rewarding watching the family as they do move towards independence, and that move from being a volunteer to a friend. It's nice to be able to move away from the boundaries that we had to set ourselves. You know, there's still safeguarding going on in your head, but you know, safeguarding issues, you know, you have to have 2 volunteers there, you have to have these little rules, and you can actually, once you establish that relationship, you can be more of a friend than a volunteer. There were exciting times. Certainly meeting families at the airport was wonderful. It was amazing. I was able to meet the first family at the airport, and it was really, really amazing. I have to say, I was very apprehensive. As I say, it was a complex family, complex needs, but the minute that family just walked through, it was just, wow, this is amazing. And they saw that, I felt that from them as well, which was, I suppose, what made it good. The children starting school, that was wonderful, you know, to get them all into schools. Watching their understanding and speaking of English improving. It was, I mentioned it, having the members of the first family helping to welcome the second family. The oldest child came to a school meeting I was at and acted as an interpreter, and it was just great for him to be able to do that. And the youngest child of the first family acted as an interpreter, as it says, at a social event, and that was even better when the person who was asking her to say, could you tell these people that? She said, well, I've done that. Okay. She knew what we needed to happen. Developing relationships are really, really nice, and helping other community sponsorship groups to start up in Bristol, where there's a couple that we're, as I said, that we're helping as they move along on the journey. The challenge is, there are certainly plenty of those, and these are just a few. Within a few weeks of them arriving, I got a phone call. I think it was one of the few left in Bristol of the team who hadn't gone away for Christmas. And one of the children had hurt her head and having to go to the hospital with the family, and all I had was my Google Translate on my phone, which in fairness, I hadn't even used. It was a tricky time, but hey, somebody answers prayers. And the doctor who turned up spoke Arabic. It's very good. Welcoming the second family during COVID restrictions, it was very, very tricky. And they had to do the 2 and 8 day PCR tests, PCR tests, not CPR. So we had to do them through the kitchen window. So they're doing them in the kitchen. We're outside collecting the samples and putting them away. iPad popped up on the windowsill with the interpreter working through WhatsApp. It was fun. It was challenging, but it was fun. Recognizing your own biases and learning to help without doing. It's so easy to think you're being helpful and just do things, but you know, the mantra has to be never do for them what they can really do for themselves. Even, you know, simple things like putting stuff into the calendar. I've often been given the electronic calendar and say, hey doc, can you put this? And I go, no, you can. But that's what we're, you know, trying to do. Just, it's to make people independent, isn't it? So that's Westbury Welcome. That's what we've done so far. So I asked the question really of ourselves, what's next? You know, is it a third family? Carry on supporting the Afghan refugees, promoting community sponsorship for itself, encouraging some new groups that have started. I think probably we're going to get involved and continue with all of those. But, you know, above everything else, it is all about welcoming the stranger. I think I just have a few personal reflections, which if I just stop sharing the screen a minute and just say, yes, my personal reflections about this really, that I realized just how ignorant I was about what was going on and what it was like, possibly, well, I still don't really know what it's like to be a refugee, of course, but just, you know, just ignorant about what's going on in the world and how people suffer and how, that's it, just ignorant. And I also asked the question to myself, well, who is the stranger? Because I'm a stranger to them and they're strangers to me when we first meet. And the welcoming has been very much a two-way process. And in many ways, I have felt more welcome than maybe I've felt that I have been welcoming. And do I generally welcome strangers? I'm not sure as a nation, we are people who do welcome new neighbours into the area. We might, oh, if we see them, give them a quick hi. But the families that we have welcomed just have a completely different culture of how to be welcoming. Their homes are open and they are just, I think we have a lot to learn. Yes, just how complex the refugee crisis is. And one thing that the other day I was at the school that the children are at, and I was just waiting for whatever I was waiting for. And they had up on this board, British values. And I've often thought when people talk about British values, and I thought, well, what are our British values? What is our culture? When you look at other nations' culture, and let's look at the Syrian people that I've been in contact with, I get a real feeling of culture, you know, a way of being. And I think, I'm not sure what ours is. But it was fascinated me that in this school they had things, British values, the rule of law, democracy, individual liberty, and mutual respect for, and tolerance, which isn't a word I particularly like, because tolerance is something. So mutual respect and acceptance for those with different faiths and beliefs and those without any. And I thought just how lucky we are, really, that is the way we are, what we have access to here, and that, yeah, just made me a lot more aware of those things. Anyway, that's the end of my presentation here. I can't hear. You're muted.
After 2 years, I'm still managing to not mute myself.
Sorry, I've gone on a bit longer, haven't I?
That's okay, Dot. I want to say to Dot and to Susanna, thank you so much for all that you have shared, through the stories, through the personal reflections, through the way that you've just shared think about how you help in a practical way. I just want to say to everyone who's attending this evening, we're now going to invite attendees to ask questions of Dot and Susanna. So if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, not the chat box, but the Q&A box. A reminder to not unmute yourself. We will pick up the written questions, and I can see that we've got 2 questions already. So there's one specifically to Dot, and then there's another question which is to both of you. The first question is from David, and he's asking Dot, where and how do you find the homes for housing?
I knew that would come up as a question. It's one of the most difficult ones, but we have been amazingly fortunate that we have had somebody who's been in a financial position to buy 2 properties and to rent them out at a subsidized rent. But I know that it's really, really a big issue. We talked to one of our new groups about it, and I mean, there's a possibility that some elderly people go into care and their houses might be up for rent. So there's finding a sort of a landlord who might be sympathetic, but we have been exceptionally fortunate. That's how we got our 2 houses.
Thank you. And we also, it's kind of a supplementary question to that from Wendy, saying, have you any advice about what happens with housing at the end of the 2 years?
Advice. I'm sorry, again, we are fortunate that the person who owns these is in he's not going to move them on after 2 years. But what we do is we do put the rent up a little bit after 1 year, 2 years. And also we help them understand that if they can move if they want to. They don't have to stay with us for 2 years, but we have to stay with them for 2 years. So we help them understand about how rent could be a bit more expensive, and we help them if they moved on. And we also help them to build up a deposit should they wish to move on. But no, again, we're fortunate, or the families are fortunate, certainly, that we know that there isn't, they're not going to be thrown out after 2 years. But I suppose circumstances could change, and we would just help them find somewhere else.
Thank you. Dot, I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but I'm going to go to Susanna now. But this is really a question from Wendy for both of you. And it's quite a big question, actually. If there was one piece of rules or legislation around refugees you could change, what would it be? Susanna, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
It's the $1 million question. Yes, oh gosh, yes, plenty of bits of the legislation should be changed. The first one, which is a big campaign led by, I think it's the Refugee Council and many other organisations in the sector in the UK, is the right to work for asylum seekers. So at the moment, important. So at the beginning, I made a distinction between refugees and asylum seekers, and why it is important to understand the terminology, because these two categories of people have different access to different, and they have different rights and duties in this country, and therefore they have different access to healthcare, to education system. So depending on what your legal status is and at what point of the process you are entitled to access different services in different ways. Asylum seekers, differently to refugees, can't work. They're not allowed to work in this country. They are basically placed in a limbo space, so where they just wait. And this waiting, according to the Home Office, is up to 6 months, but it can be years and years and years. We have members who have waited 7, 10 years until they got the indecision. And in this time, people get bored. People don't work. People don't use their brains, don't use their aspirations. They can't fuel and cultivate and nurture their dreams. So for sure, the first thing would be making sure that people have the right to work, making sure that a bit of thinking about refugees on the other side. Currently, the piece of legislation that I would change is around family reunion. If you're a refugee and if you are a kid, it's very, very difficult to request and apply for family reunion. It is easier if you're a mum and you arrived in the UK, and it is quite easy to then apply for family reunion for your kids. But if you're a kid, it's very difficult. And this is another big campaign going on at the moment with Refugee Council and Freedom from Torture, really trying to change this part of the legislation. But yes, many things. I could go on and on.
Thank you. Dot, is there anything you want to add to that?
No. I mean, I'm aware of some of what Susanna is talking about, but our experience, we're not as exposed to that sort of dreadful situation. But I'm fully aware of it's the right to work. It just seems absolute nonsense that people can't work. Absolute nonsense.
Especially, I suppose, in this time, so with Brexit, where there is, a clear lack of capacity in restaurants, in the catering industry, and the lorry drivers. So many people come into this country, they have their own driving license. It wouldn't take longer for them to take another driving test, and then off you go, fill in the gap in the market. And it's just a waste of resources.
Not sure about how long it takes to take the driving test. But,
yeah, well, that's another thing, isn't it?
I'm working with the father of the group at the moment, and the English language is so. Anyway, I think definitely it's the right to work.
Sure, thank you. We're nearly at the end of we are at the end of our hour, but there's one thing that I wanted to ask you before we draw the talk to a close. What would you say to somebody who may be listening this evening or afterwards who would like to do more to help but isn't sure where to start? Are there any tips that you can offer about how people can maybe start getting involved locally, or maybe finding out about a project near them? Are there any tips that you could offer?
Well, from the point of view of community sponsorship groups, if you were to just Google community sponsorship, or go to Citizens UK, sponsor refugees, they're the people who are fully aware of the ways that people can help. So that's who I would direct them, probably, to sponsor refugees for Citizens UK, and Google should take them there.
Thank you. Susanna, is there anything that you would like to add?
Probably just trying to highlight what Dot mentioned earlier. We are really, really fortunate in Bristol. There is a huge and really great network of organizations supporting asylum seekers and refugees. We all work together, and this is really the strength of our city, is that you never feel alone. And as an organization, I never feel like, oh, I need to do everything and I'm indispensable. And none of us it is, because we all support each other, and we feel and we complement each other's work. So if you are interested, I suppose, think about the skills that you have, and what is the area that you are interested in developing your skills. Is that the legal area? Is that you're particularly good at listening people? Are you interested in working more from a kind of a counseling point of view? And you can, again, Google things. Something that is worth mentioning is that there is an exciting partnership, like legal partnership starting in Bristol called BRASP, that gathers together 16 different organizations supporting refugees and asylum seekers, and Borderlands is on the steering group. And soon, hopefully, we will have a website, and therefore, if someone is interested in volunteering or in doing more, hopefully we'll just go on this website and we'll know everything about the city, not just the single organization. So watch that space.
That sounds exciting. We have come to the close of our time on this talk this evening. On behalf of John Wesley's New Room and the Learning Network, a huge thank you to Susanna and to Dot and to Leonette, who was with us remotely, for helping us explore this theme of welcoming the stranger. I think it's very clear that the work is very much not over, and we wish you all strength as you go forward, and hope that you will send us updates about how you're getting on. Now that it's been recorded, this talk will be placed as a digital download in the New Room's online shop, which can be accessed at newroombristol.org.uk/shop, which should be in the chat. So if you know anyone who hasn't been able to join us this evening, the talk will be able to buy and download so people can watch it after this evening. As ever, there's a couple of final notices. Our next online WES Talk will be on Monday, February the 21st at 7:30 p.m. It's the beginning of Fair Trade Fortnight, and we're going to be hearing about the future of fair trade with a representative from the Fair Trade Foundation. If you'd like to book a ticket for that, then please go to the events page on the John Wesley's New Room website. We're also hosting author Tom Stuckey in February on the 12th, as he talks about his new book, which is a reflection on the challenges to the church of the COVID-19 pandemic over the last 2 years. This can also be booked via our website. I think really we are really at the end of everything now. So thank you everyone for coming this evening. If you are an attendee, please do click leave, and speakers, please could you stay for a few minutes. Thank you very much.